Okay, so today we're going to talk about interpersonal communication. And of all the types of communication classes I've ever taught, public speaking, organizational, business communication, speech, interpersonal communication is my absolute favorite class and topic to teach. And that's because interpersonal communication is part of our day to day lives. It's the study of how we interact among people. And we are people of habit. We crave interpersonal interactions with other people. That's why we have friendships. That's why we have relationships. And so it's always something that has interested me and is super fascinating to look at. Now, I will say that there are classes for interpersonal communication that last the entire semester. So this one quick chapter, I don't expect you to walk away with a solid understanding of interpersonal communication. But we are going to look at a few of the key concepts here that I think are most fascinating. And if you find this topic interesting, I encourage you to look at interpersonal communication classes in the future because it really is a very interesting and fascinating topic. So let's get started. Like I said, it's interesting to study interpersonal communication because interpersonal communication deals with our relationships, our friendships, right? So how we create and maintain friendships, how friendships come to an end. Conversely, it also deals with organizational interpersonal communication skills, how we interact with people that we work with, how we manage those relationships, how those relationships are different than our day-to-day friendships, and how they're different from other types of relationships that we may have. And lastly, interpersonal communication is interesting because it deals with how we create relationships, romantic relationships, how we maintain those romantic relationships, and unfortunately, how romantic relationships dissolve and what that looks like for us. So you can see why it's fascinating because this affects us in terms of our day-to-day lives. So this couple is more interested in what's going on online on their smartphones than they are in each other at the moment, and it'll bring up some interesting things that we'll talk about in terms of relationships. But this really, I saw this once in an interpersonal class that I was teaching, and I find it to be pretty accurate, right? Loving relationships. You want a loving relationship, a loving romantic relationship, you've got to navigate this huge maze. And it's difficult. It's not easy. Finding someone to share your life with, maintaining that relationship, building that relationship is difficult. And I thought this thing here highlights the difficulty of that, the difficulty of getting to the middle of that maze and actually having a loving, caring relationship. Before we get started, let's have a little bit of fun. Let's look at a few things about relationships, some memes from online that may hopefully brighten your day a little bit. I like this one. Enter me. Don't text him. Let him text you. Also me. Maybe you should just text him 16 times in a row, right? I think that's cute. Never use online dating again. Last guy said he lived in a gated community. Prison. He meant prison. Like that one. And probably my favorite is this one. Guys be like, I don't talk to anybody else. And then you look at their phone and that's what it looks like. Right? So those are some cute, humorous things about relationships to get us started today. But let's look at, what I want to look at today is context of romantic relationships because it is something that most people strive for. Most people strive to find romantic partners in life, someone that they can share their life with and be happy with, whatever that looks like for you. So because of that, it's something that we can look at and hopefully in our brief time of looking at interpersonal communication can add some value for you. So a few things here. So the primary characteristic of romantic attraction is that we find people based off of similarities. We call this the birds of a feather effect. And that simply means that we generally have more attraction to people that we have more in common with. So similar personalities, similar goals in life, similar educational backgrounds, similar backgrounds in terms of where we come from and values and culture, right? So we call that the birds of a feather effect. And that is pretty true, that in terms of both friendships, but really with romantic relationships, we look for people that we have more things in common than we do differences, because those similarities are the things that are going to help us create and maintain a lasting relationship if we have things in common, if we have similar backgrounds and experiences. So there's also an interesting theory called social exchange theory, and this proposes that we will also be drawn to people that we see as individuals who offer substantial benefits. So these are people who can provide to you things that you like and want. Now this is not referring to monetary physical things that they're offering you, right? Money, a nice car, house, things like that. This is referring to our being drawn, having connections with people who offer us like emotional intelligence and emotional stimulation, right? Someone who is a caring, loving individual, someone who is a good listener, someone who is your best friend type thing. Those are the types of traits and characteristics that that this theory suggests that we will be most likely drawn to, right? Whatever those characteristics are in our own lives that we want, right? So we all value different things. We're looking for different things. Whatever it is that we're looking for, we are drawn to people who offer that to us. In terms of relationship research, it's been shown that these two things drive our initial attraction to someone, right? So our initial attraction is drawn based off of if we find people to be similar to ourselves, and if we see this person as being able to offer any substantial benefits to them, right? Are they going to be able to offer the kinds of rewards you think you deserve in a relationship? Affection, emotional support, money, sex, etc. And second, whether you think the rewards they offer are superior to what you can get elsewhere, right? Maybe you've been in a relationship in the past and you think to yourself, wow, I could do so much better than this, right? If you're having those thoughts, then that relationship is not likely to last, because you are viewing that other people outside of the relationship are more likely to be able to give you what it is that you actually want and look for and are looking for. And so you're likely to continue your search in terms of looking for a romantic partner. So Naps is a researcher who developed what he calls relational stages of a relationship. These are a little bit blurry here, but it shows that when we come together, there are essentially 5 different levels that we climb in all relationships. The first is initiating, then we go to experimenting, intensifying, integrating, and bonding. We're going to talk about those. So initiating, this is our basic, do you find them attractive, right? So a lot of times this is based, as crude as it sounds, it's based on physical attractiveness, right? So you're at a party or you're out at a social event, you're at a get-together, you're somewhere and you see someone who catches your eye, right? They grab your attention, whatever that looks like for you, right? Do you find them attractive? Do you find he or she attractive? That's often the initiating. And when you do that, when you do find them attractive, those are the types of people that we're likely to go up and have a conversation with. Maybe we introduce ourselves or we use a cheesy pickup line, right? So those are the types of people that you seek to initiate conversation with. And then that conversation then becomes experimenting, where you have small talk, the exchange of demographics. These are where these conversations are the basis. These are the foundations for whether or not we view people as similar to us. And remember, we just identified that was one of the 2 things that we use for the very basis and foundation of relationships. So if you're experimenting and having small talk, talking to someone, and you seem to have nothing in common with them, then even though you find them attractive, you're likely not to continue that conversation or want to continue any type of relationship with that person because they're not similar to you. Intensifying is where maybe now you've been talking for a while and you've decided to be a little bit closer than friends, right? However that works. And you start to experience stronger intimate feelings. Maybe now you start to disclose things that you just don't talk to everyone about, right? Maybe you share these things with your close friends, but these are things that you just don't share to strangers, right? You talk about your dreams, your goals in life, what you want for your future, the type of life that you see yourself living, the type of person that you're looking for in your own journey together in life. And so during this stage, this is where that similarity, that birds of a feather, can really come into play too, right? This is when people talk about things like kids. Do they want kids? Religion. What's the role that religion is going to play in their family? Things like that. And so those are the key differences there that may pop up. And if you don't have those similarities, birds of a feather, at this point in time is when most relationships will end, right? If people start to see themselves as being different here in this intensifying phase, the relationship is likely not to advance or move forward. If it does, if you do make it past that and you're similar and you continue to build and grow your relationship, it moves to the fourth stage, which is integrating. And during integration, you really become one. This is where you spend almost all your time with this person, right? You are doing things together. You're sharing life experiences. It becomes difficult to separate your identities. And what that means is that your life is so intertwined at this point in time that it would be difficult for you to see yourself living without that person, right? What would your life look like if that person was no longer in it? At this point in time, this is when relationships can be reinforced by sexual activity, exchange of belongings. Maybe you move in together. Maybe the toothbrush stays over, and then your clothes start to stay over, and then you move in together, right? Again, whatever that looks like for you in your own life, in your own relationships. But that integration phase is when you tend to go from living two separate lives to living a shared life together. Now, that stage of a relationship can last indefinitely. Some people never make it out of the integrating phase, and they're fine with that. But if you do decide to move your relationship to the next highest level, then that is the bonding phase. And the bonding phase is when there is some public ritual, right, that says to the world that you and your partner have made a strong commitment to one another. Now, most often when we think of the bonding phase, we think about it in the sense of marriage, right? Getting married, this public ritual that says to the world and everyone around us, to our friends, to our families, that we have made a strong commitment to one another. Now, today, in today's generation, you see a little bit of change in regards to this. Some people will say, hey, changing your Facebook status is a public ritual. Technically, it is. Technically, you are saying to the world that you and your partner have made a strong commitment to one another, or that you've decided to go steady. So I guess an updated model of NAP's relational stages here might say initiating, experimenting, intensifying, bonding, right, on Facebook bonding publicly, integrating, and then a second deeper level of bonding that would be marriage. So there are some managing strategies. Managing strategies are, okay, so you are in that integrating phase. You have made it through all of the lower levels of the relationship, and this is someone that you really want to be with. So there's a few things that we can do to really help make sure that those relationships last. And they're positivity. Positivity is often overlooked, but just having a positive outlook on life, a positive outlook on the relationship, is a really good managing strategy, right? Thinking that the relationship is going to last, that it's going to work out, that this is someone that you can really spend your life with. Just be positive about that, and that can help manage and and work through some of the stress that relationships can create. Openness. Openness is about having clear, open, and honest communication with your partner, letting them know how you feel. Don't hold things in, right? Don't hold things in and then blow up. Don't be angry. Don't go to bed angry. That's a quote someone told me a long time ago, and I try to live my own life in terms of relationships by that. So just be open. Be upfront about what your expectations are, about what it is that you're looking for, right? Assurances. Assurances are when we say things like, I'm always going to love you. I'm always going to care about you, right? Yes, I want to be with you. Yes, let's make this work, right? Those types of things. Assurances become more important when we're dealing with conflict. We're going to talk about conflict briefly. So assurances are a very positive and beneficial thing, especially when dealing with conflict. Sharing activities, it seems common sense, but if you want to really build and maintain a relationship with someone, you need to have shared activities. You need to do things with that person, right? Maybe you go to the movies. Maybe we have date night where you go to the movies once every 2 weeks. This is more important in the later stages of relationships. In the initial stages of relationships, when relationships are new, you want to spend all of your time with that person. That person is all you can think about. Later in life, after you've been with that person for a while, when that newness wears off, it doesn't mean that you love them any less. It just means that your relationship is in a different stage, right? But it is important at those times to continue to look for shared activities to keep your relationship healthy and to keep it moving forward. Share tasks, right? Do things together. Go on trips, things like that. Do whatever that looks like for you. Find ways to share tasks. And also sharing social networks. It's very difficult when you have a social network and your partner has a social network, and those networks are mutually exclusive of each other. It benefits when you have mutual friends, now that doesn't mean you can't have friends that your partner isn't friends with, but it does mean that the best relationships are going to move forward when people have similar social networks, because you're going to be able to do things with each other within those social circles, and your relationship will be healthier because of that. It's a lot easier to have trust and to maintain trust when your social networks are blended versus, okay, I'm going to go out with my friends. Well, who are you going to go out with, right? You'll get that question. Who are you going to go out with? Oh, just a friend. You won't know them. Okay. Who? How do you know this person, right? So then you can see how that level of questioning, it can just create tension in a relationship and uncertainty, and then you don't want people questioning your honesty or integrity in a relationship. That's one of the top things that causes relationships to fail, which we'll look at. So just like Knapp's relational model had stages of coming together, he also has stages of coming apart. And that's differentiating, circumscribing, stagnating, avoiding, and then terminating. And we're going to look at that. Part of the reasons why romantic relationships dissolve is due to inequity in relationships. So equity is how a relationship is balanced, a sense of proportional justice. And this often determines whether or not a relationship really takes root in that integrating phase and if it ever moves to that bonding stage, right? So equity, proportional justice, this is your relationship balanced, right? And it's balanced from perspective of what is it that you're bringing to the relationship? Are one of you super supportive, and a good listener, and the other one just does nothing, right? So you are you looking for balance in terms of emotional stability? And then also here, finances does matter, right? Equity of finances. Are you contributing more than the other person? Are they contributing more? If you over benefit, it often results in guilt. So say, for instance, you move somewhere with your partner, and your partner, because your partner got a really good job, but you don't have a job in that new city, but you move because you want to be together and you want to stay together. And they're like, don't worry, I'll take care of things. I'll support us until you find something. Well, the person who doesn't have the job is going to feel guilty. They're going to feel like they are over benefiting from the contributions that the other person is making. And if that persists, or if it goes on for too long, then the person who is contributing too much can get angry, right? They can feel anger. Well, why haven't you found a job yet, right? Are you looking? What are you doing, right? And then that can create anger, and then that creates tension, and then that tension creates conflict, and then that conflict, if it's not dealt with appropriately, can lead to the termination of a relationship. So this idea of equity and inequity is the key foundation and thread through relationships. So let's look at this quick clip here that highlights two clips that highlight equity and inequity.
He started to call some venues, and shutters can see you as early as Friday. If you want to go beat you with the whole thing.
You're officially going to take over this wedding, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. Just sit back and let my organizational skills wash all over you.
Excuse me.
Oh, thanks. Dude, that's not my car. What's this? Joss, I can't wait to marry you. You drive me insane, drive safe, precious cargo, love Scott.
What? Wait, he bought you this car? Oh my God, he bought you this car? Where's my car?
Your fiance drove it back home.
Oh my God!
Right? So clearly some inequity there. I would actually be okay if someone wanted to buy me a Tesla, I think. But here is the second part of this.
I'm seriously so embarrassed that I'm even bothering you with any of this, considering everything you're going through with Daniel.
Daniel is over. And besides, I am so happy for the distraction. So, what's the problem? Okay, you had a fight with Scott?
Okay. He bought me a Tesla.
I think we have different definitions of the word problem.
April, do you remember how excited I was when I bought my coupe? I saved every penny, and I bargained my sweet little ass off to get the best deal, and it's finally paid off. And it's cute, and it's dented, and it sputters, but it's mine, and I love it. I could never in a million years afford that Tesla.
So Scott is making you pay the payments on the car?
No! That's the worst part. It's a gift. The gift of dependency. And you want to know the worst part? I'm already getting used to it.
Well, it's okay to get used to his lifestyle. You're marrying him. What's his is yours.
Do you know what I always thought would be the hardest part about marriage? Monogamy. But you know what? I could sleep with only Scott for the rest of my life and be totally fine. It's stuff like this crazy Tesla thing that freaks me out. I've been a kept woman, April. I can't do it again.
Joss, this is not the same as being someone's mistress.
Isn't it? What kind of gift is that? It completely throws the whole balance of power out of whack. How am I ever supposed to get mad at him when he can hold a Tesla over my head? April, I've spent the last year trying to get my life together, and I'm finally the independent woman that Destiny's Child wanted me to be. So tell me this, what if marrying Scott changes all that?
You're not considering calling off the engagement, are you?
I don't know. I don't want to lose Scott, but I don't want to lose myself.
So I think that's an interesting clip there that does highlight sometimes what can happen if there is a perceived inequity in a relationship, right? Because people can hold that against us, right? And they'll throw it up in your face every time you have an argument. And that's negative. That's clearly negative and detrimental to a relationship. There are some barriers to cooperative communication, and the main barriers here that we see is deception, are things that can damage a relationship and prevent that relationship from not only moving forward, but might cause that relationship to go down a path of termination. And deception is the primary thing that people cite as the reasons their relationships end. And that's when we just, in short, it's when we lie, right? It's when we deliberately use uninformative, untruthful, irrelevant, or vague language for the purpose of misleading the people that we're in a relationship with. We lie. We deceive them. That's the number one thing that people say harms the relationships and can lead to the relationship dissolving. Concealment, though, concealment often occurs much more frequently than all of the other forms of deception combined. And concealment is when we omit facts, details, or we simply just don't tell the complete truth. Now, we could have some very interesting conversations around concealment, and when is it okay to conceal the complete truth. It's an interesting thing, but we do it a lot, and we often do it thinking, well, I'm going to hide this because I don't want to damage our relationship. So sometimes I do think that we can conceal things in relationships out of a true attempt to not harm the relationship. I do think it's possible, but sometimes concealment can lead to more deception, or if someone finds out that you've been hiding something, it can actually make things worse. So it was an interesting conversation to be had there. When we look at relationships dissolving, clearly this relationship here is not on a good path. They are probably not going to have a pleasant conversation whenever they get to dinner or wherever they're going. But relationships do end. It's a fact of life. Most of us have had failed relationships, and it's just simply a part of life, right? You will find yourself at times where your relationships are separating, and so that relationship will start to go down the ladder there, right? We looked at how relationships go up through stages. They also go down through stages, which is important to know, because relationships generally just don't suddenly end. It's a process that leads to termination of the relationship. And because that's how relationships work, the good thing there is, if you really care about someone, if you love someone and you want to make that relationship work, you will have the opportunity to step in and change it, and to save that relationship, and to keep that relationship from coming apart. And that's the really cool thing about it. So the first stage of relationship termination is differentiating. And this is when we no longer are consumed by how similar we are to our partner. We start to look at how different we are. So we're no longer looking at those positive traits. We're no longer looking at our shared experiences and our backgrounds and how we like the same things and want the same things in life. Instead, we're now focusing all of our attention and our thoughts on the differences. We then move to circumscribing, and this is where we actively restrict the quantity and quality of the information that we share with our partners. So maybe when things were good, they'd come in from work and they say, "Hey, honey, how was your day?" And we might respond with a long story about, "Oh, you won't believe, my day was so long. We did this, I did that. I can't wait for the weekend to get here. Oh, let me tell you about this. You won't believe what happened." Instead, when we are in the deterioration of a relationship, they say, "Hey, how was your day?" They say, "It was fine." And that's all the information we share, right? Maybe we start to do things. We start to see friends, old friends, things like that, and we simply don't share that information with our partner. So that is circumscribing. That leads to stagnation. Stagnating relationships, and the stagnating phase, that's when we restrict more and more quality and quantity of the information. And that leads to a standstill, where you essentially reach a point where you either think to yourself, or maybe you say it to your partner, "You know what? We don't have anything to talk about. There's nothing to talk about." It's simply not true, but you're just at that stage in a relationship where you're finding less and less things that you want to share with that person. Avoiding, that leads to avoiding, where you actually begin to physically distance yourself from your partner, so you avoid them because you don't want to be around them. And lastly, that leads to terminating. And terminating is where you discuss the past, the present, and the future of your relationship, and you decide that it's best for that relationship to end. And hopefully, if you do that in a very civil way, that gives you closure, and that closure allows you the opportunity to move on with your life. So the good news is you can reverse these stages. So if you're at any point in stage prior to termination, you can reverse that relationship and get back to a happy, healthy relationship. But the bad part is, the further down that ladder you go, the harder it is to get back. So if you're at that top ladder, or circumscribing on the second rung, you can stand a good chance that you can make that relationship work and you can save it. If you get down to stagnating, it's difficult. If you get down to avoiding, it's almost impossible to come back from that. And so catching it early and seeing these stages and deciding that you're going to do something to actually work is going to make a big difference. I often tell students the number one thing that you can do to help maintain and save a relationship is just to stop and think before you speak or think before you do something. Consider the short and long-term consequences that your actions are going to have on that relationship, right? Think about how if you choose to communicate positively instead of negatively, how that will shape the future of that relationship in positive ways versus the damage that you could cause that relationship if you choose to focus on the negative. Right? So stop and think before you say anything, especially if you're arguing. It's okay to tell someone, you know what? I need a few minutes to clear my head and get some air. I love you. I care about you. And I don't want to say or do anything that's going to hurt you and hurt our relationship. So let's just cool off a minute, and then I'll promise we'll sit down and we'll talk about what's bothering you. That's a much more mature way that we'll actually build some strengths in the relationship versus hurting it. So 3 ways that we can also practice cooperative communication, and these are going to be things that help our relationships, is that we can speak in ways that use honesty, relevant and clear, informative language in our relationships, right? We talked about honesty, right? Be honest with our communication and honest in our relationships. Relevant is an interesting one, though. Relevant is choosing to focus and talk about things that are only relevant to your relationship and only relevant now. So you don't want to talk about previous relationships. You don't want to talk about what someone did to hurt you in the past, right? Because it's not relevant. Yes, someone might have said or did something that hurt you in the past, but if you chose to continue with a relationship at that point in time, then it is now unfair to that person to now bring it up and continue to harbor that negative emotion and use that person against them. Or use that, sometimes it is a person, maybe they cheated on you, but if you chose to continue that relationship, it's no longer relevant to hold that against that person, right? And that's on you. And can be difficult for people to do. Take ownership for what you're saying, and we call this using I language, and then you can also make people feel included rather than excluded, and we can use we language. We're going to look at that real briefly here. So you language is when you say things like, you make me so angry, or you messed this up, or you need to do this, or you've hurt me, right? You never pay attention to me, you don't listen to me, you don't love me anymore, right? That you language, that makes people defensive, right? You're attacking them when you say you. So instead of saying you, just tell them how you feel. I feel like things are messed up and I don't know what we can do to fix it. I'm feeling hurt right now. I feel like, I'm feeling, right? This I language, this taking responsibility for your language and your emotions is really beneficial for relationships, especially if you are trying to save your relationship that is going down the negative side of the ladder towards termination. A few things here, like we said, honesty and deception. Those are the 2 of the key things that people say will end a relationship. Most people will say if someone cheats on me, the relationship is over. They're not getting a second chance. Whatever that looks like for you. I like this quote. I have tried to use this in many aspects of life. Cheating is a choice. It's not a mistake. People say all the time, I made a mistake. I'm sorry I made a mistake. No, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And that's okay. You made a choice, but you need to own up to the actions that whatever choice it is that you made, you need to own up to that. Be honest about that. And then that's the only way that a relationship is going to overcome that. If you're honest about it, if you admit the choice that you made, if you talk about why or what happened, you then give your relationship the ability to at least attempt to overcome that. If you just try to sweep it under the rug, say I made a mistake, it'll never happen again, I love you so much, blah, 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 your relationship 99.9 times out of 10 will not overcome that. You won't trust that person. And if you don't trust that person, it's going to be hard to maintain that relationship. So when we talk about conflict is a process that occurs between people who perceive incompatible goals, right? Resources or interference in achieving their objectives. When we talk about conflict, there's a few key features. Conflict generally unfolds over time, right? So conflict generally isn't spontaneous. Most arguments build. Most conflict or disagreements in relationship builds over a course of time. Conflict is, however, determined by the communication choices we make, and it's transactional. So everything we say or do influences what the other person says and does. So we mirror other people's communication behavior. So if you're having an argument and someone starts yelling and bringing up the past, you're probably going to start yelling and bringing up the past too. But if someone takes the approach that I mentioned earlier and says, let's calm down. I love you. I care about you. I'm sorry. Let's talk about this. Then the other person is likely to calm down also, because everything we say or do influences how our partners perceive that conflict. A few types of conflict. We're not going to dive too deeply in this, but civil conflict is the best type, where you can calmly and rationally discuss what it is that's bothering you. Let's talk through this. We can figure it out. Deja vu is conflict that follows a predictable pattern, meaning you fight over the same thing over and over and over again. And you know when it's coming, and you know when the conflict starts, and you think to yourself, oh gosh, here we go again. Indirect, mocking, sarcastic, sniping, that's really bad forms of conflict. That's where you don't really address the conflict directly, but maybe you do it inadvertently. You know, you make snide comments, or you're sarcastic, and then we know what the other person is saying at that point in time. So those are some of the different types of conflict, right? It's shaped by our perceptions or schematas, and that's whatever our previous experiences are. Those things shape how we perceive conflict, and especially in relationships in regards to irrational thought, goals versus resources. If we view someone as standing in our way, then we're not likely to want to really move past that at all. So most conflict occurs between people who know each other, and therefore romantic relationships are the relationships you're most likely to have conflict in. Makes sense if we think about it, right? Prolonged contact, frequent interaction with people, means that you're more likely to have conflict. You know these people, you're around them, you're spending time together, and so it's more likely that conflict is going to occur. So communication patterns develop for dealing with conflict, and what that means is that we will develop patterns in our relationships of how we deal with conflict. And if those are healthy patterns, then it may promote health and well-being in our relationships. Or if we have unhealthy patterns towards conflict and how we deal with conflict in our relationships, it can undermine our happiness, and it can make it much more difficult to have and maintain steady relationships. So conflicts in relationships, as we wrap up here, is it presents unique challenges, and it does that because it's challenging because of the amount of information that these people know about you, right? So if you've integrated and you've shared all of these qualities and aspects of your life together, then you're probably bonded together. And so conflict provides, these, when you have conflict, there's a tempting arsenal there to use, right? Because we have shared personal information with people, and we tend to want to use things against people. So, and that's not good. That's not good or healthy. We call this kitchen sinking also, when we bring irrelevant information into the conversation, right? Well, you did this, or you did that, or someone told me that you said this, you did that. That's kitchen sinking, when we continue to throw everything we have at someone just in an attempt to hurt them, right? When our goal is just to make that person feel bad. That's a poor way of managing conflict. So some takeaways here in regards to emotional investment, right? The more emotionally invested you are in a relationship, the more likely that conflict in that relationship has the ability to hurt you, right? And so conflict with people we love is guaranteed to be intense. It's guaranteed to be a emotional draining experience because we have intimate connections with these people. We have invested large time, maybe years of our lives with these people, and the longer you're with them, the harder it is to walk away, right? Interdependence and routines, right? We talked about when your lives become tightly intertwined and wrapped around each other, it becomes hard to see yourself starting over. And sometimes people stay in abusive and bad relationships when they shouldn't, but they do it because they have invested so much time. They don't want to see that time. They don't want to say, I've wasted these years of my life. And they also think, what's my life going to look like if it's just me? Am I going to make it? Do I want to? And so those are the types of things that often threaten our ability to walk away from a relationship. So conflict affects our future interpersonal relationships as well, because it goes into our field of experiences, and we use those experiences as we enter relationships with new people, and that can create conflict in those relationships, right? Because we judge people based off of what our previous partners did, right? And maybe you've had the conversation where someone says, "I'm not your ex. I didn't hurt you. I'm sorry they hurt you, but that wasn't me." Right? So it has the ability to shape our interpersonal encounters with people in the future. So we need to handle or resolve conflict in positive ways. Conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Every conflict presents the opportunity for resolution. And with every failure of resolution becomes a part of your overall relationship history. But every successful conflict resolution can strengthen and bond your relationship together. I want you to think about this in closing here. Think about your relationships in the sense of a piggy bank, in the sense of emotional currency. You're going to do things at different points in times, especially in the beginning of your relationship, where you're putting money into these piggy banks. So maybe you're going to the movies together, you're going to dinner, you're having long conversations on the phone, you're texting frequently, you're going for walks, right? You meet their family. All of those things, when you do those that puts emotional currency in the piggy bank of your relationship. As time goes by and your relationship, if it's deteriorating and you're going down the different stages of relationship, you're starting to squeeze that piggy bank, right? Because now you're fighting. And now you're saying mean things, and now you're not handling conflict effectively. And when you do that, you're taking money out, right? You're taking money out of the bank, and at the same time, you're not putting money in. So you start to distance yourself if you reach that stagnation phase. So you're not talking to each other anymore, or as frequently. The types of things you're talking about aren't the same. You're not doing things with each other. You're not going to the movies. You're not going to dinner. You're not talking about a shared vision of the future together. And you're still fighting, so you're still taking money out. So that piggy bank becomes so drained to the point where you overdraft. And when you overdraft, when you have said and done more hurtful things to that relationship than the positive things that you've put into it, that the relationship breaks and it terminates. Now, it's not to say that piggy bank can't be put back together again, but I guarantee you it'll never be the same. And it'll be very, very difficult to keep it together. So the goal of your relationships, think about them in the sense of an emotional piggy bank. You should always make sure that you have enough emotional currency in that piggy bank to account for the rough patches and the conflict and the difficulties that will present itself in every relationship that we will have. Conflict is a part of our life. How we handle that conflict, however, is what will shape our relationships and what will decide if those relationships continue. So if you find yourself in a relationship with someone you care about, someone you love, and you start to see those stages, identify those stages of the relationship being damaged and hurting, stop and ask yourself, what can I do? What are some of the things that I can do to make this relationship, to put money back into the emotional piggy bank of this relationship? How can I reverse these stages and make this relationship last? So I said interpersonal communication is interesting. It's fascinating. We could talk about these things for hours and hours and hours. But I do hope that you enjoyed the lecture and you did learn at least some insightful ways of looking at conflict and personal relationships that may be beneficial for you moving forward.